or whether it is 2912 or 33-3, one person dominates the entire process. And until we are prepared to walk away from this Westminster Whitehall version that that has evolved over some time and start addressing the real issues of how we get real accountability, transparency, etc. in the system, nothing much is going to change. So you can change the current government, put another one in, and you're going to come back a few years afterwards to talk about crisis in leadership and corruption, and it's going to continue.
But people must change the system, and what does it say about the people who are occupying? But Ms. Mangal, maybe I can ask you, Dr. Mangal, looking at the system that's in place, is there a crisis in leadership? And looking at the quality of people that now occupy leadership positions?
Well, I would want to agree with Dr. Ghani to say that the systems indeed have to be improved. People do work within the systems, but yet still what we're trying to do is create innovators, people who are original thinkers, people who can challenge the system. And so there is a role for leadership. There is a role for morality. And this is exactly what the business school has developed its leadership program on the principles of morality, principles-centered leadership, not just in politics, but across all institutions. So, yeah.
David, you work on the ground, and you see the perception that people may hold of those who occupy these offices, these who have been charged with the responsibility of governing this country.
Yeah.
Is there a crisis? Do we think that we have good leaders, moral and principled individuals?
Well, from my vantage point, I think that with the social crisis that Trinidad and Tobago is currently experiencing, unfortunately, gang leadership seems to be more effective than political leadership. I think political leadership historically, over the last 50 years, we can say generally, has failed to equitably distribute the state resources. Therefore, you have, with all the poverty, unemployment, and low minimum wages, gang leadership has harnessed some of those resources and is now redistributing it. So in many instances, those who cannot find a means to provide for themselves or have access to food, clothing, and shelter through mainstream society are now drawn towards gangs who are trafficking cocaine, engaging in robberies, killings, murders, etc. And the gang leaders are redistributing resources, and as a result of that, have a kind of loyalty towards them, which is similar to the loyalty that the political leadership has, but not from the wider society, but from close colleagues and associates.
Looking at morals, ethics, and the principles that govern the decision-making process, a number of you observe the political debate. A number of decisions are taken in the best interest of this country that not necessarily are in the best interest of this country. Well, where's morality? Where's principle at this time?
Well, I think that the latest controversy is perhaps the best example of what you're talking about, in the sense that there is an argument about why was Section 34 proclaimed. The question is, how did Section 34 get there in the first place? And who approved that it should be there in the first place? And I think that, at some point, there is a political dimension to the debate. And it was very interesting that 5 senators last night voted against the repeal. So it tells us that sometimes we want to focus only on certain dimensions of things, and we don't want to look at the big picture. So that in the context of the leadership, all kinds of leadership have been demonstrated in this issue. You have the DPP issuing a statement, you have the government responding, taking swift action, you have independent senators saying don't repeal,
right,
despite everything that's gone on. So, at some point, one of the things about leadership is you must take responsibility for making mistakes, because nobody is perfect. And that is one dimension of this. But there's another dimension I want to bring in, and that is the issue of attitudes to power. Because there's one dimension in our society where power is viewed as status. And the issue of servant leadership or power as service is not a dimension that really has been given the kind of play in our society that allows us the opportunity to see holding office and having power as something that is linked to service as opposed to status. And I think that, the society has come out of a kind of British colonial past where the attitudes to power really are based on plantation and post-plantation ideas of what power should be. And the way in which power is exercised, in many respects, has been abusive towards populations in the Caribbean.
abusive power, status, and linking that to the overall population. Dr. Mangal, you made the point about morality and principles. Now, we look at the overall structure that exists, but the types of people that occupy these positions, are they moral? Are they principled? And who really determines what is morally correct and the ethics that we allow our leaders to be held to?
Well, let me say that we do. And everyone has the potential to demonstrate that morality. We're all born human beings, and therefore we're all born with the potential to demonstrate that morality and principle consciousness and so on. The question is, to what extent do we actually reflect on our behavior? Do we actually reflect on what we're doing? And do we determine whether that is principle-driven, that is driven in the interest of humanity, or actions and behaviors will serve those sustainably, and therefore we become, if you like, sustainable leaders. We've seen leaders rise and fall, and with the fall comes nothing after that. They fall and they go into the background. How do we create sustainable leadership? How do we create people who can actually lead and be known in many, many years to come? The Mahatma Gandhis and so on.
Do you think that anybody locally can be considered a Mahatma Gandhi, an Indira Gandhi, can be looked at a Nelson Mandela? Are we the kind of people that will create this leadership?
We all have the potential to do so. And that is why we took on the challenge. We all have the potential. We have to create the opportunity as educators, put people into the systems and challenge their morality, challenge their principle consciousness and so on.
David, do you have hope in that?
Yes, I do. And I think that principles of morality are very effectively propagated by politicians prior to entry into office. However, after successfully winning the election...
So maybe Basdev Pandey was right. Maybe politics does have a morality of its own.
It certainly does. But also, when you consider the public profile of, say, someone like Anand Ramlogan or Ramesh Lawrence Maharaj, prior to coming into political office, they had, even someone like Errol MacLeod, persons who have a very consistent social justice record on terms of the ideologies that they shared with the public. And then they're confronted with the dilemma of having to represent political secular interests once elected. And I think many politicians on all sides have suffered that crisis, that inner conflict of standing up for one thing. I mean, an issue such as gay marriage in America, for example, many politicians would have been against it out of office, but for it in office, and vice versa. And you have many similar situations in our local politics, which brings back that whole idea of power corrupts, but absolute power corrupts absolutely. Right. And I think it's happening in our country.
But there's another school of thought that now says only the corrupted are attracted to power.
Oh, well, a 50-year-old nation as we are, I think soon we will be able to identify the patterns and maybe transform the politics once and for all.
We do have to take a very short break. When we come back, we'll continue this discussion. Stay with us. Welcome back, Trinidad and Tobago. Is there I want to say a special good morning, actually, to Edna Ramsajan. She actually is looking at our show, so good morning. But we're going to continue our discussion with crisis in leadership. This coming out of a report that was released by the Arthur Lockjaw Graduate School of Business, which looked at the competitiveness, how we fare internationally. A number of factors were looked at, a number of indicators were looked at as we came up to this conclusion. Trust in public officials, trust in politicians, trust in the governance structures. But power is not just politicians. Leaders are not necessarily the politicians in society. Where are the other leaders? Revolution, there was the whole Arab Spring and the Arab Revolution, all led and sparked by the actions of men and women who then emerged as what we consider to be martyrs nowadays. A man lit himself on fire in front of the presidential palace, demanding some sort of change, demanding the injustice come to an end. He is now revered as a leader. Do we have that type of leadership in Trinidad and Tobago? Let's take the politicians out of it. Where civil society? Where is everyone? Or have we really become an eat-a-food society?
Well, to a large extent, the Arab Spring was, in many respects, a revolution where you didn't have an identifiable leader. It was almost like a leaderless movement. And much like the Tea Party in the United States, if you want to say that. There's no identifiable leader. But these are movements of people who want something. and are prepared to coalesce around it. And what has happened is that social media has changed the way in which the leadership function can be exercised, so that we are dealing with also a changing landscape. So that it's a phenomenon where, identifiable leaders don't necessarily have to lead movements. Issues can be items around which people who want something to be done and simply express it. You have a situation right now in the Middle East where, again, it's almost like a leaderless movement, but it's based around a particular set of emotions that are moving people in a particular direction. So it's a phenomenon we have to observe, and social media has contributed a lot to that kind of change in the nature of the leadership itself.
Are we seeing leaders out of everyday society, Dr. Mungo?
We do see them from time to time. I think coming back to your point about civil society, it is a critical part of any society, of the development of any society. And we have not really seen the maturity of civil society movements in Trinidad and Tobago. Passion for a purpose is one thing. But after that, you have to become much more competitive. You have to learn the art of collaboration as well. So it's not just who can speak most loudly, but who can speak more effectively and efficiently. Michael Porter told us quite clearly, not just our business organizations, but all of our organizations need to become much more competitive globally. And that's where the leadership will arise, where we need to have masses of students, masses of people trained in leadership for us to get there.
Trained in leadership. Are we training leaders? David, 10 seconds.
That's exactly where my thoughts were going. We have to pay a lot more attention to the development of young leaders, particularly in the primary and secondary schools, in sports teams, debate teams, class prefects, etc. That goes a long way.
David, we do have to go straight to the 7 a.m. newscast. When we come back, we will continue this discussion. Stay with us.
A very good morning, Trinidad and Tobago. I'm Ria Rambley, and this is Headline News on CNC3 and the TBC Radio Network. The Senate has passed the Administration of Justice bill, but not without some opposition. The bill, which was passed just before 11 o'clock last night, saw 5 independent senators voting against it. During the debate yesterday, independent senators expressed concern over moves to repeal Section 34 of the Act, saying that it should instead be amended.
Honourable members, the result of the division are 25 members voted for, 5 voted against, 0 abstention. This bill is passed.
Police are investigating a major fire in Tunapuna last evening. The fire is said to have been at the business place of murdered Tunapuna businessman Raghunath Suknanan. As it spread to adjacent businesses, firefighters spent hours trying to contain the blaze. The fire claimed 2 variety stores, a clothing store, a Creole kitchen and a bar. Fire officers are yet to determine the cause of the fire. It's day 2 of Teachers Sick Out, and Trinidad and Tobago Unified Teachers Association expects many more teachers to stay away from classrooms today. Tutor claims that the teachers have been forced into taking this action by the Chief Personnel Officer's laid-back approach to negotiations. Tutors First Vice President Devanan Sinanan says there was a 75% absenteeism on Thursday.
In the Caroni District, it is around 80%. In the Northeastern Education District, around 82%. In the Tobago District, it is more like 80%. In the Victoria District, it seems to be around 73%. In the Southeastern District, it is about 80%, and in the Port of Spain District, about 75%.
Days after gang violence broke out in the Laventil community, the top brass of the police service and possibly the National Security Minister will be going into the area later today to meet with those in the community. Last weekend, a rise in gang warfare claimed 5 lives, 4 in the Beverly Hills area alone. The army has been deployed alongside the police to prevent further bloodshed and to keep the peace in Laventil. The Integrity Commission is seeking more legislative teeth in tackling corruption in public office and has begun a review of the Integrity in Public Life Act with a number of recommendations.
We want increased powers of search and seizure as well as arrest. There are very high-profile people on the European continent, I wouldn't call names, whose offices have been raided and documents taken away in search of possible evidence against corruption. All right? We want those same powers.
Stay tuned for another news update at the top of the hour, and our major newscast is at 7 this evening right here on CNC3.